Aloha, everybody.
Aloha, Happy New Year.
What? No Hawaiian? No? Okay. No, that's good. You're smart. You're smart. We are in the book of Ruth. What a privilege it is to study this book of the Bible on this wonderful woman and the encounters that we will see and watch with her. This is one of two books of the Bible that are dedicated about females in the Bible. The story expands beyond that, Esther being the other one, and they are deeply rich spiritual experiences and lessons for us throughout life. So if you find Ruth, the first chapter of Ruth, it's right past the book of Judges, you will be able to dive in. And I'm going to encourage you at the front here, make sure that you read ahead. This is a short book, but you will enhance your study, especially after today as we introduce it, much more by just reading ahead. And there's some great lessons to be learned. So I'll give you just the brief background. This is during the time of the Judges, which, as you may know in your biblical understanding, was a very dark time for Israel. It was a dark time for history. And Israel basically had a cycle that they would obey God, and then they would fall into idolatry and sin from other nations. They would be judged, they would repent, and then as the cycle, like a clock, they would start over again. That cycle repeated itself over and over again during these dark days. And God had sent judges to minister, but also to correct some of the issues that were taking place. Ruth's story is right in the midst of that dark time. And as the first chapter will unfold it for us, we will also notice that eventually through the book that a line or a lineage of Jesus the Messiah is found in this book as well. So it's important for future purposes as well as practical lessons as well. The theme of the book is a kinsman redeemer, and the author is unknown. Some think Samuel wrote the book, but he came a little later, so really unknown. But here we are examining Ruth and the Moabite society that was really considered pagan and filled with idolatry, as we mentioned. And along comes these words in verse 1. Now it came to pass during that time of the Judges. It came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land. The story really centers in Bethlehem. We're familiar with that. We're also familiar with recently the crisis that came out of Bethlehem for Mary and Joseph, this unplanned, unknown of pregnancy, and they find themselves in Bethlehem, but then all that God has done through that. We're right back in the same setting from the last month of studying the Christmas story. It says that a famine came into the land, it's the land of Judah, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to dwell in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his two sons. Before we're introduced to him, here again why he departs. And it's interesting because much of the story, you have to speculate a little bit, but much of the story is around this reason why he would leave. We've read that there's a famine, and that would be often the case in a variety of places in the world. We've been involved in famine relief with different agencies in Africa and different places around the world. But that's a crisis. And in Bethlehem, again, there's this crisis of a famine, and people can't get food. And they're trusting God, many of them, but it was a difficult time. We don't want to take that away because he's going to make a decision based on his crisis situation. It's interesting. You've had to be forced to make decisions, I'm sure, in times of crisis. Maybe it's a loss of a loved one or a fire itself, a house burned down, or death and divorce, and all of these things that are crises, and people must make a decision how they're going to respond. Apparently Moab, and we don't know if Naomi is initiating this or if it was his decision, but as you look here after the first verse regarding the famine, This certain man is named Elimelech. The name of his wife is Naomi, and the name of those two sons are Mahlon and Chilion. They're Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah, and they went to the country of Moab and remained there. The reason they went was because of the famine. Was it the right move? People will bat that around. I like to think of the father's decision here going, I've got to save my family, I've got to do something right. But the question becomes, was he trusting God? Did he move too soon? Those are all the questions that surround the story. Did he ignore God? Who was involved in the decision? But Elimelech is now moving his family, including his wife Naomi and the two boys, and they move to Moab. Now remember, Moab's a pagan country. Moab is filled with idolatry. Their gods were as many as you can count. And here is a Jewish man moving his family into hostile territory spiritually, and he remained there. He stayed there. It's about a 10-year process that we're going to be studying here. He stays there. The story moves pretty quick, but watch what takes place while they're there. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her two sons. So now they're in Moab. They've moved away from Bethlehem. They moved away from family and friends, from the land of their God, and suddenly she's a widow. And she's a widow with two sons in a foreign land. So her provider is now dead. She's in a foreign land, raising two boys. And this is the situation she finds herself in. Remember this as she reflects back, as the story continues. It says she was left, I like that term, I bet she felt left. Left alone, left frightened. She's there with her two sons. You can imagine the questions, how do I provide for these? I'm in a foreign land. I can't just contact someone from my homeland easily. And now my husband is dead, and I am left alone with them. Now they grow, the boys grow, and they took wives of the women of Moab. That was their only choice. They're in a foreign land, so as they become of marrying age, they both took wives from the local country. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. So they take two Moabite wives, one Orpah, one Ruth, and as a result now, she is single mom, married sons to pagan daughters. Don't you love the names, Orpah? I heard a Bible teacher say, I didn't get a chance to Google this, so please do that for me later, that Oprah's mom wanted to call her Orpah and misspelled the name. So you can do your fact Hollywood work. I like to keep you current on the Hollywood situations, you know. You can check that out later, but he said that was the fact. I'm afraid I'm going to call her Orca sometimes and really be in trouble. But either way, that's her name. She's one of the two daughters. Right in the middle of this story, her sons have married them, and with her husband dead, her left alone, this is now where she finds herself tied in, so to speak, through the family with these new daughter-in-laws, Orpah and Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years for our time frame. Then both Mahlon and Chilion, her two sons, also died. So she's out of her country. She's lost her husband. She's lost both of her sons. And she has two daughter-in-laws from a foreign land. Would you say Naomi's life has changed a little bit in the last decade? And she is sensing, and you'll hear it, that she's far from home, but also far from God. I like this line. So the woman survived her two sons and her husband. We're not told how they died. In the order we're told how they died, but we don't know. And now she's not only left alone, but she is surviving the menfolk, you might say, in her family. You gotta feel alone when you lose your husband, you lose both your boys, and she's blessed with these sweet daughter-in-laws, but you just gotta feel a different kind of impact when you're that far away from home. And a certain homesickness and all that would come with that is now Naomi. I would also insert that she's got to be a pretty strong woman, to go through all this. I mean, she's going to be very transparent with us and anyone that reads the book. But to survive this, even to this point, has to be a strong woman. But watch how honest she is as it unfolds. It says in verse 6, then she arose with her daughter-in-laws that she might return from the country of Moab. And this is the reason. First of all, remember the reason they left? There's a famine in the land. And now this is her reason for returning beyond the deaths. For this reason, she had heard in the country of Moab, when she was there, that the Lord had visited his people by going, back in Israel, by giving them bread. I left because there was no bread. My husband and I left because there was no bread. I've lost my husband, I've lost my sons, and now I'm hearing from Moabs living out here as this widow that there's bread in the land. That God has revisited, so to speak, and is extending help to the land that she is from. And she had heard that the country from where she was at, that God had visited. Isn't that sweet? God never abandoned Israel, by the way. It's interesting, in crisis or bad situations, we will often go, or people will often go to, well, God's either judging them, and sometimes that's the case, not always ours to comment on, or sometimes God has abandoned them or put his hand against them. But in the long picture, in the big picture, in the book of Ruth, you'll see that God's always been involved in Israel. He'll faithfully be involved with Israel. He wants all Israel to be saved. That's part of the reason we support Israel. But as a result of all of that, she suddenly hears that the Lord had visited his people. It's beautiful terminology, isn't it? We call them God's chosen people. She's heard that even through this famine, that God visited his people by giving them specifically bread. He's provided food for them. And so as a widow in a foreign land with all her male providers, if I could present it that way, gone, dead, 2 daughter-in-laws, she's got some decisions to make. And therefore she went out from the place where she was, and her 2 daughter-in-laws with her. They join her by walking out of that place with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. So just freeze frame that for a minute. Everything she's been through, and now the decision is, let's get back to Judah. Let's get back to where my God can feed us and protect us and care for us. He could all along, he did all along, but that's her decision. She's made the decision to head back, and the 2 girls are going to follow her initially here. They went on their way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters, listen, you go, both of them, you go and return each to her mother's house. There's no reason for you to leave your country. Your husbands are dead, my sons are dead. It would be better for you go back and return to your mother's house, so you will be safe, you will be cared for. The Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. These women have been so gracious to the loss of her husband, and regarding the loss of their own husbands, her sons. And she prays over them or kind of speaks over them. Let the Lord deal kindly with you, just as you have dealt kindly with the dead and with me. A wonderful relationship she's describing with her daughter-in-laws. Just a sweetness and a care and recognizing their compassion. And now she wants to think of the best for them. And so she says, the Lord grant that you may find rest each in the house of her husband. In other words, go back, find another man, remarry. That's proper. Your husbands have died. Find rest, find peace, raise your family in your own land. This does not mean that she didn't love them. That's evident in the compassionate statement. She loved them dearly. Now, love's going to only grow. But she says, listen, don't worry about me. And I don't want to put you in a tough situation going into a foreign land. I just did that and it didn't work out too good. So I'm encouraging you to go back to your family and each of you find your husband. So there's the statement. And she kissed them and they lifted up their voices. This is the three of them now. And they wept. So great was the love and the compassion. And when you go through something like that, through death and through loss and through famine and through financial struggles, you can either grow stronger together or grow apart. This is that case where they grew stronger together. And she, out of her selflessness and her love for them and their future, kisses them, lifts up their voices. They all lift up their voices and they weep. And they said to her, both of the sisters initially here, so surely we will return with you to your people. We're not leaving you stranded, Naomi. We love you. We'll go back, even though it's a foreign land to us. We'll go back and we will return to you with your people. But Naomi responded differently. But Naomi speaks and she says, no, turn back, my daughters. That's what they were to her. Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? And listen to her reasoning now in her grief and in all that she's experienced. Why should you or why will you go with me? Are there still sons in my womb that they may be your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go. For I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband tonight, and should all bear sons, and should also bear sons, would you wait for them till they were grown? Would you restrain yourselves from having husbands? No, my daughters, for it grieves me very much for your sakes that the hand, and listen to her now, self-understanding of what's happened. It leaks out right here. Because it grieves me very much, my daughters. I don't want to move too quickly from that grieving concept of her. And she says, here's how I view what's happened. The hand of the Lord has gone out against me. I don't want that to be contagious to you. That's how she felt. You lose a husband. You lose your family when you left. You lose your home. You lose your financial resources. You lose 2 sons. In Naomi's mind, the last thing she wants to do is to bring those precious daughter-in-laws into that world. And she displays for them and herself that she believes the hand of God has gone out against me. That's like saying God is judging me. Which leads some commentators, by the way, to think maybe it was Naomi that pushed for the move. We don't know that. Maybe it was a mutual decision when they left Bethlehem. But her summary now is that I believe God's hand has gone out against me. You ever felt like that, if you're honest? Some people go through difficult time and say, God must be judging me. Look what's happened. I've been following God faithfully for years, and now this has happened, this loss and this grief and this death, and financially I'm destroyed. And she views all of that as the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. And they respond. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. Now they're weeping for her spiritual conditions. Now they're weeping for how she's expressed her emotions. And they all lifted their voices and wept again. And now notice the difference it sets up the rest of the story. It says, Orpah, after this second meeting, so to speak, Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, But Ruth clung on. Ruth clung to her. It's as if Orpah accepted that, wanted to honor her mother-in-law, saw the reasoning, and so she kisses her as is to finalize, but Ruth clung onto her. That word clung is used a few times in the Bible. It really describes deep affection, appreciation. Do you remember when Jesus healed the demoniac? And the simple gospel word is there after that happened, that the man who was demon possessed, now free, clung to Jesus. And in the encounter after the tomb, do not cling to me. It's a natural desire. It's intimacy. It's the expression of love. But she is clinging. See that picture? One says, okay, I accept that. I'll go on with my life. But Ruth clung to her. And Naomi has to explain to Ruth in verse 15, look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. She's gone back. She went off to start a talk show and made millions of dollars. No, that's another. Your sister has gone back to Moab. You do the same. I don't want to bring you in to where God has his hand against me, so Naomi thought. But Ruth is clinging to her. Ruth won't let go to her, of her. And now your sister's gone back to her gods, even though they're pagan gods. Return after your sister. It would be better for you there, in Naomi's thinking. And once again, in crisis, in emotion and pain, we often refer to our own thinking and our own choices. We say, well, this would be better, this would be that. But we need to ask God, hey, what are you doing? And if you don't show it right away, then give me the patience until I see it. She's at a crisis point and says the best thing was for them to go. But Ruth won't accept that. And here in one of the most beautiful poetic verses of the Bible, after Naomi tells her that, Ruth responds, and she says it this way. Naomi, entreat me not to leave you, or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. Wow. Survey. Anybody have a daughter-in-law say that to you? Doesn't mean that they don't love you if you have a daughter-in-law, but you see what she's doing. The witness of Naomi, even though she may be failing in her faith, I don't even like that term. She's in the midst of challenge. Not only can God handle that, by the way, we mentioned last week when you hear this term, the deconstruction of faith that so many are going through. God's all about wading through that. Just know who your contractor is, and he'll be happy to reconstruct your faith and build it properly. But in crisis, she's shaky, she's falling apart, and even though she said that, the hand of God is against me, Ruth says, you know what? I want to follow you. And included in that following, I'm going to go wherever you go. I'm going to be wherever you lodge. I'm going to have your people be my people, and your God, who you think is against you, I'm going to have your God be my God. Where you die, I die, and there will I be buried. And the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts us. What a commitment. What a commitment. The remaining few verses flow rather quickly. But just because they do, don't miss the significance. When she saw that she was determined, that's Naomi saying, this girl is determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her. No more discussion. She's coming with me. She could see it. She could feel it. She's still clinging to her. And she stopped talking. Now the two of them went until they came to Bethlehem. And by the way, Moab is just across the Jordan. It's the Jordan River right across. It's modern day Jordan. So, I mean, it's a distance, but you're back in your homeland. They're back in Bethlehem. And it happened that when they had come to Bethlehem, that all the city, remember it's not a real big city, all the city was excited because of them. And the women in the city said, "Is this Naomi? Is this our Naomi?" 10 years. She aged far more than the years by then. Death will do that to you, won't it? Loss of a husband, loss of 2 boys. Is this our Naomi? Is this the same person? But she said to them, "Do not call me Naomi." Remember where her head's at still. She thinks God's hand's against her. So she says to the women of Bethlehem, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara." By the way, Naomi means pleasant or pleasantness. Mara means bitterness. She become bitter. And God is still using her. Did you hear that? Even when we fail and struggle in our faith, God is still using us. Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. My name is Mara. I'm switching it. She explains a little, I went out full, husband, boys, and the Lord has brought me back home again empty, no husband, no boys. Remember, this is her perspective. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has afflicted me? That's exactly how she felt. And God will have a wonderful way of saying, watch what I do with those 2 words, full and empty, in the remainder of this book. Don't forget those 2 words. He's afflicted me. So Naomi returned, and Ruth, the Moabitess, she's bringing a foreigner, a pagan, into Bethlehem, her daughter-in-law with her, and they returned from the country of Moab. Now they came to Bethlehem, and you cannot miss this. Remember, she heard there was bread in the land, that God was feeding his people? She left, and the season was famine, no food, destruction. She returns, and you can almost miss it if you rush the chapter. She returns at the beginning, new season, of barley harvest. It's time for the harvest. And God brings her in his perfect timing, now along with beautiful Ruth, into the season of harvest. And that sets up the remainders of what you're probably going to be reading this afternoon, I hope. You don't want to wait till next Sunday. And in his majestic plan, Ruth will meet Boaz and life will change. But the process is what we want to watch. The process of trusting God, even when it doesn't go the way I think it should go. Even when we might feel like we've served faithfully and suddenly our world's flipped upside down. Even when poverty comes and the political gets insane. By the way, spoiler alert, it will again in 2025. It'll be insane. You will be shaking your head. I think good things can happen, but it's going to be insane. There's your prophetic word for the moment there. But in the midst of it all, we may say, God is against me. Why would you do this, God? Your hand is outstretched against me. And God says, no, my mighty right hand is around you. You just need to wait to see the outcome. Aren't you glad you live in a day and age in 2025 when you can read the accounts and say, look how God did it. I don't know how God's doing it in my life right now, you might say, but look how he did it here. Oh, we'll turn a few pages. Look how he did it here. God is faithful all through the Bible. He's faithful all through your life. He's faithful all through the days of America. And he has only good for us. And so we want to serve him as a result. I hope you fall in love with this book. Many of you have read it before. We've studied it before. But I hope you fall in love with the intimacy and the honesty of someone who loves God but cries out, this hurts too much. You must be against me. And I hope you wait and see, as you read ahead, how God not only corrects, but blesses beyond imagination. Let's bow our heads together. Thank you for making these Bible characters present before us. Thank you how telling Naomi's story will remind us to highlight a verse or underline it or memorize it to say, oh boy, that's what I'm going through. God doesn't abandon us. Thank you that judgment took place on the cross, and we are made righteousness from the cross, not because of our good works. Thank you for mercy and grace that we celebrated with communion this morning. And thank you that there is a kingdom waiting for all of us, that we will never struggle again with health issues at Mission Hospital or personal issues at home, but yours is the kingdom and the power forever, and we will live in eternity that way. Teach us through your word until that day comes, we pray. For thine is the kingdom